Thank you for listening to the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast with hosts Clara and Jimmy Hinton. If you're new to the podcast, please subscribe and share so you will never miss an episode. Android users can find us and subscribe on your Play Music app. Apple users can find us and subscribe on Apple Podcasts. You can find us on Stitcher. You can follow us on Spreaker. And you can find the podcasts on jimmyhinton.org or findingahealingplace.com. Please rate our show, subscribe, and share so that we can spread the word. Let's get into the show. Welcome to this week's podcast here with Jimmy Hinton.
And Jimmy's mom, Clara.
Well, it's good to be back. We were off for a couple weeks. We've been dotting the skies and the roads with our travel, and we've been incredibly busy. This is a very busy season. So anyway, we're back, at least for now.
We're back and glad to be back. Home is always good.
It is. So there are a lot of, I think, pressing current events that are going on right now, and we just wanted to kind of break from what we were doing in our last series and talk about some of the current events. And one of them is that something that's going on here in Pennsylvania that is not public knowledge. And I just found out a bunch of stuff this last week because I did a training for a police department, actually several police departments, as well as the district attorney's office for the county north of us. And they shared some things with me that are deeply troubling, and they certainly were concerned about it. So we're going to talk about that. We'll talk about the Southern Baptist Convention and some of the things that happened yesterday and what our take is on that. And then after we've brought you down, we're going to build you up at the end and offer hope, because to be honest, the first two things I think are pretty grim. So we'll start with Pennsylvania. When I was at this training, the district attorney's office, the ADA raised her hand and she said, I don't know if you're aware of this, but all of the teeth have been removed from the district attorney's offices around the state. And she said, we now have absolutely no teeth to convict sex offenders or really any other crime. And I said, no, I wasn't aware, and just kind of asked her what she was talking about. And she said that Pennsylvania removed the mandatory minimums because they found them unconstitutional. And that's a very recent thing. So I'll talk about that and unpack that here in a little bit. But the other thing they did is with sex offenders, Pennsylvania found that the sexually violent predator status was unconstitutional. So what that means is, for sex offenders who were given an SVP designation, and by the way, that's a legal term only. That is not a medical diagnosis. That's the Sex Offender Assessment Board who assesses inmates, and they recommend to judges that a judge give somebody, a sex offender, an SVP designation. Only a judge, prior to that being abandoned, only a judge could give the SVP designation. And they could choose or not choose to do that. That was entirely up to the judge. So with the SVP designation, that meant that state police would knock on doors within a 1-mile radius once these guys were released from prison. So if you had a sexually violent predator, a Tier 3 SVP, you had state police that would knock every door and hand out a flyer telling you have a dangerous predator living nearby.
Right.
And the other thing that it did is that the SVPs were required to go to counseling for the rest of their life for once a month upon their release. So there were certain guidelines that SVPs, because they're dangerous predators, they had to abide by these laws.
Forever.
Right.
Okay.
So now that's been removed. That's been found unconstitutional. So now you have this blurring of lines, and you cannot look somebody's record up and find out if this person's an SVP because it doesn't exist.
Now, Jimmy, is that for everything forthcoming? How about those that were legally termed SVPs prior to this, the removing of this?
I didn't, to be honest, didn't think to ask that. That's a very good question. My guess is that, well, that's probably anybody's guess. Pennsylvania is the only state that has written into our state constitution that it's unconstitutional to enact a law and to do that retroactively. So my guess is that, I don't know, boy, that could really go either way because they do some funky things with these laws.
We should look into that because, not just if the slate is going to be wiped clean, so to speak, that'll do away forthcoming, we know, with this legal term. It'll do away with police warning people in their neighborhoods, and it will do away with the therapy that these SVPs would normally get. So I'm wondering if it's retroactive, if it erases, wipes the slate clean, which I'm thinking in time it probably will be declared illegal to have this term attached to someone. I'm almost going to bet that that'll happen if it hasn't happened.
See, this is kind of a different case because this is not a law that was created. This was saying that an existing law is unconstitutional. Yeah. So, that's a good question. Can they go back retroactively now that they found it unconstitutional?
And since this legal term was given by a judge, can that slate just say, well, Judge so-and-so, we're wiping this clean, just erase it?
I would say very possibly.
Yeah.
If it hasn't already happened. So, to me, that opens up the door for all the imprisoned sex offenders to come back and say, well, this was unconstitutional. This was found unconstitutional.
That's exactly where I'm going with this. It just opens the door for a lot of inmates, a lot of prisoners.
No pun intended.
Right.
It opens the door.
Yeah. No pun intended, but it's opening the door.
Yeah.
It really is.
Well, the other thing to make it worse is that they found the mandatory minimums unconstitutional. So what that means is, people who are given a sentence, like they gave an example. They said statutory rape in Pennsylvania carried a 2-year mandatory minimum. If you were charged with statutory rape, that was a 2-year mandatory minimum, which means a judge cannot assign a sentence below that minimum threshold.
Right.
They now did away with that. And so they said potentially, and not just potentially, they gave examples to me. They said, they had a case just this past week or two. And they said this guy severely raped and abused his very young biological daughter. And this guy got I don't remember what it was, like a year sentence or something like it was this little slap on the wrist. And so here this man will be turned back out onto the streets pretty much immediately, and he'll be right back in the home, and he'll do it all over again. So, they said we've lost all bargaining power with plea deals. And, that was coming from the district attorney's office themselves.
This is, to me, a huge step back.
Yeah.
A very big step in the wrong direction.
So this all started in 2015, and I did a little bit of digging, and you can't find news articles on this. There's nothing written on this. Nothing. There's not one reporter.
That's often how these things get into place. It's very quiet.
Yep.
They don't make big splashy headlines.
I'll bet reporters don't even know. And
right.
You better believe I'm going to be on the phone this week contacting reporter friends in Pennsylvania to report this.
Right.
So, in 2015, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court's ruling in, I'm reading this right now, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court's ruling in Commonwealth versus Hopkins found the state's Drug-Free School Zones Act unconstitutional and simultaneously invalidated many mandatory minimum sentences. So let me explain that a little bit. So the Drug-Free School Zone Act, excuse me, said that if anybody was selling drugs within 1,000 feet of a school in Pennsylvania, that carried a mandatory minimum of 2 years. And the whole premise of that law was protection of our minor children.
Right.
We don't want our children hooked on drugs. So don't deal in school zones. They found this unconstitutional. And so what they did is, since the Supreme Court found it unconstitutional, that now is a case law. And they went back and they used this as a case law and applied that to, my understanding is, all mandatory minimums. And they said since this was found unconstitutional, now all mandatory minimums are unconstitutional. So this says in 2018, the Pennsylvania House of Representatives passed HB 741, which, if passed by the General Assembly, would reinstate the state's mandatory minimum sentences for drug offenses. The Senate did not vote on the bill. So currently, right now, there are no mandatory minimums.
I'm just shaking my head in disbelief, honestly, because with that removed, it's free reign for the criminal, it so to speak, without mandatory minimums. And I'm sure word has spread among those who commit the crimes.
I guarantee it.
Yeah.
And the thing, the whole purpose behind this, the end goal is to empty our prisons. Right. And that's the dirty little secret, is that, and they flat out say that in this, this is not an article. This is a PDF document that I found by the group who sued the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So they say, one of the points, prison population has declined since they found this unconstitutional. Well, of course, because people aren't going to prison now, who should be going to prison. The DLC is saving money and closing prisons. The Department of Corrections' annual budget remained over $2 billion from 2015 to 2017, but the DLC will spend $93 million less in 2017-18 than it did in 2016-17 fiscal year. In 2017, the DOC closed State Correctional Institution Pittsburgh, which is expected to save the DOC over $80 million annually. So, what's happening is they're closing prisons all over the state, and that's their goal. Their goal is to reduce the number of inmates because of the burden that it has on our budget.
The fiscal budget, absolutely, and I can vouch for that. I'm in our local prisons 2 times every week. I see the crowding, the overcrowding. I see the COs who are burdened with overtime. They're working long hours, double shifts often, which their pay is it's off the charts here. But there are not enough people to take care of those who are inmates.
Right.
So it affects the whole population. I get that part. The sad part is, like you said, there will be many, many, many who don't even enter the prison system because of these.
I know firsthand from talking to the district attorney's office that that's happening right now.
Right.
There are people who are not going to prison because they've opened the door for this, and they don't want them to go to prison.
Right.
So the DA's offices have absolutely no power anymore. So it gets worse from there.
It's right.
This thing that they're bragging about how since we've enacted this, crime rates are dropping in Pennsylvania. Well, I just spoke to a police officer friend of mine yesterday, and she said, "Are you aware that in the last couple years since all this has been enacted, a couple things have happened? One is that our police departments have been absolutely hacked down to nothing." She said in Somerset County, where we live, the state police who patrol the entire county at night have 2 troopers who patrol the entire county. And not only do we only have 2 troopers, but they put them into one cruiser. We have 1 car and
It's
2
so
troopers
scary to think
for
of.
our
It
entire
It
county.
really is. It's frightening to think of.
So yeah, no wonder crime rates are dropping. We don't have the manpower to arrest people.
Well, and we're not seeing the whole big picture too. As our prisons are releasing prisoners, I'm just talking locally here. We've infiltrated families that have come to visit. They've moved here. They're not all really great people. Let's be honest. They're in prison for a reason. To get into prison, you have had to do something really terrible or you wouldn't be there. So now we have our crime rates going up, theft, and it's not uncommon to hear of shootings now every day in Cambria County. We have the drug problem is skyrocketed.
The gang problem,
problem
in Johnstown, just north of us, the little city of Johnstown.
20 miles away from us right now. But we have all of this exploding, and along with that is the sexual abuse problem that already had a strong foothold. Now the teeth to do something about this have been removed.
Yeah.
And it's sad, it's frightening, it's disturbing, and you have to wonder where the lawmakers were when they voted to remove declare these minimums unconstitutional.
Yeah. Well, the DA's office told me, too, they're completely overwhelmed. And the police, too. The police who were present, they said, our departments are absolutely overwhelmed because we've pulled, our lawmakers have pulled the budgets out from under them. They can't hire nearly as many troopers. In this place that I went to, they were trying to figure out how they were going to have enough money to buy sandwiches for us.
Right.
That's no joke.
No, it isn't a joke.
That's where we're at right now.
I work with it every day. That's part of what I work with are budgetary items like this and mental health. Those budgets have been pulled.
But the irony in this, and I am calling these lawmakers out. I sit with Pennsylvanians United to Protect Children. So I'm on with Sean Doherty. He's one of the ones who founded that. Right. Mike McDonald, the Fortney sisters are part of that group. So we are going to shake Harrisburg up, and we're going to hold them accountable. But we need to be really informed. And I have a problem with lawmakers touting all these child abuse laws as if they're helpful. We have this mandatory training and, we're teaching people to report abuse. My thing is, so what? You can report abuse all day long. Now,
who do you report
it's meaningless.
Who's going to listen?
It's absolutely meaningless.
And what law?
We're not putting them in prison.
Yeah, it's frustrating. It's sad.
So that's what's going on in Pennsylvania. So, I want the public to be very aware of that, and I'm going to be making some ripples, letting lots of people know that.
To make big waves.
Because I can't find one blasted news article on this. Not one. This needs to be public knowledge.
It very quietly happened, I'm sure.
So, moving to the SBC, what happened yesterday, the Southern Baptist Convention, I think most people are very cautiously optimistic. I am cautiously non-optimistic. I think I'm far less optimistic and a lot more skeptical because the Southern Baptist Convention has been saying the same thing since 2007. And for such a time as this rally, they met yesterday, and I wasn't able to be down there physically, so I put a video up. I made a video, and sent it down. And then for such a time as this, Rally aired my video yesterday on their Facebook page. And my point in the video was the very fact that we're having a debate over whether known and convicted sex offenders should still be preaching in the pulpit. We're not even talking going to church. We're talking, these are people who are pastors.
I'm just shaking my
very
head.
fact that we're having this debate to say, should we expose them? Should we have a registry where we put their name out there? The very fact that we're having this debate is absolutely embarrassing, and it's insanity.
It's very telling of where people are based on our previous podcast that we did with the foundation that was laid for us. That when you go back to that very foundation that we talked about for several weeks now, it's like how can they say they're standing on that foundation?
Yeah.
Can't be.
No.
Cannot
Well,
be.
I want to read something
and I say that, very vocally. I don't feel shy to say that. But it just doesn't coincide with what God has put out there for us. It really doesn't. Go ahead, Jimmy.
This was a Houston Chronicle article that was published last night. This was 10 o'clock last night. It's very accurate. 9:49 to be exact.
Correct.
So this is Houston Chronicle, and the title of the article is SBC Passes Sex Abuse Reforms, Acknowledges More Work is Needed. Okay, so I'm going to skip to one part just because of time. This is the one that really jumped off at me. So Wade Burleson, he's a Baptist pastor in Oklahoma. And Wade is a go-getter. I like him because he's just very vocal. He's really pushing for this registry. He's been pushing for several years now for a searchable registry of credible allegations of people who are pastors, who are preaching, who are actively preaching.
That would be so valuable, so helpful.
So let's see. This happened yesterday at the SBC convention. They have these messengers. They call them messengers, and that's people from local churches around the country who are able to float their own proposals. So here's what the article says. Those messengers are also allowed to float their own proposals. Among the first to do so on Tuesday was Wade Burleson, an Oklahoma pastor and longtime advocate for sexual abuse reforms, who called on his former employer, the International Mission Board, to make public an internal report on predatory missionaries. Okay, so let me pause for a second. They have a complete report. It was an investigation into missionaries among the Southern Baptists who are abusing minor victims. Okay? They have the report. They have it in their hand. But they kept it under lock and key. So they're doing the International Mission Board. Exactly right. I was just going to say it's exactly what the Catholic Church has done.
Absolutely.
With their secret vaults within their diocese.
So here we go again.
Yeah, we're doing exactly what the Catholics are doing. And so, the Southern Baptists can't wag their finger and say, my, how awful it is that the Catholics are doing this. Nor do they have the right to say, boy, we're taking abuse seriously. It's just words.
It is.
Because their actions prove otherwise. So listen to this. So Wade Burleson put up this motion, let's make this report that already exists, let's make it public. The Mission Board was the subject of a recent Chronicle investigation that found a pattern of cover-ups or mishandling of abuse claims by Mission Board officials. Mission Board officials did not address any abuse issues during their scheduled address to messengers on Tuesday. That was yesterday. So they didn't even bring up abuse. Here the mission board is meeting. They didn't even mention abuse. Just slipped their mind.
Yeah.
Burleson's, this next sentence got my blood boiling. Burleson's motion was not allowed to move forward. A decision he said was stunning and tone deaf. So they shot it down. They didn't even allow it to go forward.
It fell on
That was
deaf ears.
yesterday.
The motion fell on
That
deaf
was yesterday.
ears. Well, what's that tell us?
That they're full of
Settle it, Jimmy. Settle it, Jimmy.
that they're all talk.
Right.
This is why survivors are skeptical.
These protective measures that they're talking about are the concealed, it's the concealed truth, and it says that they're not changing.
Mm-hmm.
If they shot down Burleson's right there, they shot it down, would not hear, fell
They wouldn't
on
even
deaf
move it
ears,
forward.
Right, wouldn't move forward. That says they're not doing what they say they're going to do.
Yeah.
Period.
So
Period.
words are meaningless,
right.
and it's to me it's just like the offender who says, "Oh my goodness, I'm so broken over what I've done," but their actions show
Go
otherwise.
right back out.
Absolutely.
Right. Go right back out and repeat.
So I have a hard time, and this is the skeptic in me. I have a hard time really believing that the Southern Baptist Convention is so gut-wrenched and upset over all these survivors who've been abused. I have a hard time believing it.
The focus, I think, is more on the concealment. Let's keep it quiet. We don't want to deal with
this report
big,
that exists.
Yeah.
They won't make it public.
No.
They don't even let it go up for a vote. They shot it down immediately.
Yeah. And that is telling.
It's very telling.
That gives a message loud and clear.
Because they're not even, it's like they don't want to debate it. That decision was made before Wade even opened his mouth.
There you go.
They already knew they were going to shoot this down. Nope, not moving forward.
Right.
Any decent human being would say, well, let's debate this. Let's put it up for a vote.
I just shake my head. I'm just sitting here shaking my head in semi-shock. Still.
Yeah.
I'm
not shocked anymore. I see enough of this so often.
It's horrible.
These cover-ups are on very, very deep.
Very horrible.
So the other thing too is, the for such a time as this rally, they asked for a space within the convention center to peacefully. They keep calling it a protest in the media. I don't even know that I would call it a protest. I think it's more lament. That they're crying out and they're saying, we want there to be action. We want there to be less words and more action. Right. People are being hurt right now in the church. You're employing churches all over the Southern Baptists are employing people who have criminal records, sex offenses against children.
I just said to Jimmy previous to this podcast, is it any wonder that we are having such a mass exodus from our churches? When you have victims of abuse who are supposed to listen to these leaders and be taught and fed the word of God by them, and they are known to be criminals, and you have the churches protecting them rather than the victims, and even rather than acknowledging even the victims of abuse, there's something majorly wrong.
Yeah.
Very, very wrong. So, that I understand.
Oh, I do too. Well, and the other thing too, the for such a time as this rally was, they were denied space within that. Right. So then, they asked for permission to meet in a public space outside of the convention center on a sidewalk. They were denied that. They posted the email that was sent, and it said, due to logistics, we can't allow people, because it's a tripping hazard and things like that. We can't allow people to use public spaces. And by the way, for such a time as this rally, they wanted to hand out resources for survivors of sex abuse. So
It's such a shame.
And Mary DeMuth was part of that. Ashley Easter, a lot of really good friends of ours and advocates. Jules Woodson spoke at it. On and on. There were just so many good
knows the people that you're talking about knows they are peaceful,
absolutely,
very, very sweet people. They're not there,
incredible
up in arms
people,
and, right, pounding fists and yelling and that.
Not at all. That's not their. Not their goal. Their goal is to help survivors and to keep more innocent people from being harmed. Right. So, in a nutshell, they were denied this space. They were given like this tiny little sidewalk, like a sidewalk, and the convention said, well, you can have this little space. So yesterday they announced that Matt Chandler was coming out of sabbatical yesterday to speak at the convention because there was an article that was posted a couple of days ago about the Village Church and its cover-up of abuse. So the rally, for such a time as this rally, said, isn't that ironic that logistically, we can't give you guys the space. By the way, they've been asking for the space for a year. For a year. For a year. Sad, they've been asking for this we know why. One little space.
We know why it was denied.
Absolutely. So Matt Chandler was rushed in yesterday and given a seat at the table, and he was allowed to talk. He was given a microphone, and they charged $5 per head to go sit at Matt Chandler's feet. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So this is why people are upset. Yeah. This is why the SBC has lost all credibility, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. So they can form this committee all day long. And, I think that was, to quote Krista Brown, that was a step. Was it a good step? Or was it a big enough step? No. She said, basically it's a joke. Because I think this committee, as good as it is, and I am not knocking this committee whatsoever. Rachel Denhollander sits on the committee. Mm-hmm. You have a lot of big hitters on this committee that they're not backing down. And I listened to Rachel 2 nights ago. And she was sitting beside J.D. Greear, and she did not mince words at all. Yeah. I mean, she's very blunt. And, so I'm not knocking the committee. Please don't mishear me here. But I think this committee, my opinion is it's a dog and pony show put on by the SBC. I hope I'm wrong. But they're going to have to prove me wrong because their actions right now are speaking way louder than their words about how heartbroken they are over abuse. And, we've been hearing that for years. Mm-hmm. And nothing has changed. So, I think the committee's a good thing, but I think the committee in the end, it doesn't have any power. And the SBC, I think, is a very big machine, and they're going to keep suppressing, victims, and they're going to keep hiding abusers in the church. We've been seeing this now for several years. Absolutely.
Yeah,
so where does that leave us? Now that we depressed you all, where does that leave us? Well, actually, I'm incredibly hopeful. Our justice system is declining, we'll put it that way, at least in Pennsylvania and a few other states. By the way, the irony is we're rah and saying criminal background checks. And if you see something, report it. Well, yeah, that doesn't really work, clearly. So not saying that you shouldn't report it. You always report it. But, we have stripped all power from the legal system. And we're turning abusers out on the streets left and right in our state. So, you have that going on, and there's a couple other things. So where does that leave survivors? I think that survivors are the ones that hold more power than anybody else in the world. You have more power than church leaders. You have more power than the SBC itself. You have so much power, and this is not hypothetical. And I'll mention my good friend, Jules Woodson. Jules And she's so sweet and quiet and, just a lovely person. But she is fierce.
She's relentless.
And
she
named her abuser by name.
Yes. Yeah.
And she was threatened. She was intimidated. She was called a slut, a whore, all these horrible things. And Jules never backed away from that. Right. She named her abuser publicly.
Right.
And look at what the result of that was. Look at High Point completely just blew up.
Yeah.
And so many cover-ups within High Point were exposed, and so many pastors were removed. Right. Rightfully so.
Right.
They were removed from ministry. Jules did that.
She single-handedly and nodding my head, yes, because I'm so proud of her and all those like her.
Yeah. You have Rachel Denhollander. That was very public.
Right.
Rachel really went out on a limb, and she contacted the media, and she said, I want to go. It was the Indy Star, and she said, I want you to publish this report, and I'm going on record by name as Larry Nassar's victim, because I know deep down inside that there are many more out there. When she did that, when that Indy Star article published, they were flooded with calls from survivors. Look at how many people came, and that resulted in good, swift justice. And, Larry Nassar is behind bars, and hundreds of victims came forward publicly on record.
There is such power in the voice of one, is what we go back to, which you and I have reemphasized over and over and over. Does that mean every victim has to speak? No, there are some who still are in a position where they can't yet. But those that are, believe it when Jimmy says you hold the power. You do. The power is in your voice of telling the truth. That's it.
Yeah.
Once that happens, when that truth is exposed, you'll see everything comes tumbling down as it should.
So that's our message. When you're shut down, when you feel defeated, lift up your voice, speak out. Don't be afraid. Find other people who will hold your hand. Find other survivors and advocates who've been there, who've called their abuser out by name, and stick by their side and
know you're not alone.
Yeah,
you're not alone in this. Yeah, when one person speaks out, there are generally many, many more to follow, and that's powerful.
Yeah. So I'm hopeful. I think our legal system's letting us down in many respects. I think that churches definitely are letting us down. I think what happened yesterday, though there were some good things that happened at the SBC convention, it's not all negative. There were some good things, but I think overall the message that I got from yesterday was we're just going to double down and do more of the same. That was the overwhelming message that I heard. Maybe that's just the skeptical side of me, but
I don't think victims will permit it, though, Jimmy.
No,
I think
they're going to keep on the heat.
Yes.
And that needs to be done, and they'll be back next year, and survivors that'll just keep growing and growing. So
keep pressing on.
Yep. So that's our truth bomb for today. Survivors, keep speaking up. You are making a difference. Trust me. There are a lot of people who are trembling right now, and you're the ones making the difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. So thank you for tuning in, and we'll catch you next week. Thanks again for listening to today's episode of the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast. If you found it helpful, please follow on Spreaker, subscribe on Google Play Music, Apple Podcasts, or Stitcher. Share with your friends and tell the world. Join us in speaking out on sex abuse so we can change the tides and prevent abuse.